I pulled into the driveway of 847 Maple Drive after 6 months away, my heart already warming at the sight of the old blue shutters. Then I saw them, a young couple unloading boxes from a moving truck, laughing as they carried furniture through my front door. My mother stood on the porch, clipboard in hand, directing them like she owned the place. When she saw my car, her expression didn't change. "Elaine," she called out casually, "you should have told me you were coming." I climbed out slowly, my legs feeling weak. "Mom, what's happening?" She adjusted her sunglasses. "I sold the house last month, got an excellent price too." The world tilted. I reached into my pocket, pulling out the keys I'd carried for 30 years, the keys to my childhood home, the home my father built. I walked to the door and tried them. They didn't fit. Someone had changed the locks. I drove straight home to Mark, my husband of 15 years. Surely he'd be as shocked as I was. I burst through our door, words tumbling out about Mom and the house and the strangers moving in. Mark looked up from his laptop, his expression oddly calm. "I know," he said quietly. My heart stopped. "You know. Your mother called me last month. She explained the whole situation, how the house was too much for her to maintain, how the market was good. It made sense, Elaine." He stood and walked to the kitchen, returning with an envelope. "She wanted to make sure you got your share." He slid it across the table. Inside was a check for $50,000 made out to me, signed by my mother, Patricia. "Your share?" I repeated, my voice hollow. "Mark, that's my father's house." He shrugged. "It was in her name too. She had the right." I couldn't sleep that night. At dawn, I drove back to Maple Drive. The moving truck was gone, but the house looked different already. Someone had removed my father's old mailbox, the one he'd painted himself. I used my old keys on the back door. They worked. Inside, the house was nearly empty. Boxes lined the hallways, and furniture sat covered in sheets. I walked through each room, my footsteps echoing. The kitchen where Dad taught me to make pancakes. The living room where we'd watch storms through the big window. My old bedroom now stripped bare. In the master bedroom, I found one drawer they'd missed. Inside was my father's old toolbox, dusty but intact. Beneath it lay a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. My name was written across it in Dad's careful handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was an old property deed and a handwritten note. "For Elaine, only when you're ready." The county recorder's office smelled like old paper and floor wax. I waited in line, the deed clutched in my hands, until a young clerk with bright eyes called me forward. "I need to verify something about this property," I said, sliding the documents across the counter. She examined them carefully, her eyes widening slightly. "Oh, this is interesting." She pointed to a paragraph I'd barely noticed, a codicil added 3 years before Dad's death. It gave me partial veto power over any major property decisions, including sales. "This means," the clerk said slowly, "that any sale would require your signature to be fully legal." My breath caught. "The house was sold last month. I never signed anything." She looked up, concerned. "Then technically the sale isn't complete. You'd need to contest it, but you have grounds." I walked out of that building with my father's final gift, proof that he'd protected me even after death. I confronted my mother at her new condo. She opened the door with a martini in hand, clearly not expecting me. "Elaine, what a surprise." "We need to talk about the house," she sighed, stepping aside to let me in. "There's nothing to discuss. It's sold and done." I pulled out the codicil. "Dad gave me veto power. The sale needed my signature." Patricia's face tightened. She glanced at the paper, then laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "That old man of yours never understood property law. That codicil means nothing. The sale is complete, the money's transferred, and the new owners have already moved in." But I saw it, the slight tremor in her hand, the way her lawyer, standing quietly in the corner, avoided my eyes. "We'll see," I said softly. As I left, I heard her lawyer murmur something urgent. She snapped back at him, but I couldn't make out the words. I showed up at the lawyer's office 2 days later, wearing my best professional smile. The secretary didn't recognize me as Patricia's daughter. "I'm here about the Maple Drive property," I said warmly. "Just need to verify some filing details." The secretary, clearly overworked, handed me the file without question. I photocopied everything in the lobby, my hands steady despite my racing heart. Back in my car, I spread the papers across the passenger seat. The sale agreement, the title transfer, the closing documents. Every page had my mother's signature, but the page requiring my signature, the one acknowledging the codicil, was blank. They'd sold the house without the one signature that mattered. The missing signature was mine. And that changed everything. I drove home and locked the documents in my safe, then sat in the dark, planning my next move. I was in the kitchen when I heard Mark on the phone in his office. His voice was low but excited. Curious, I crept closer. "Yes, Patricia, the cabin's perfect. I saw the listing today. With your half in my savings, we can close next month." My heart stopped. I pressed record on my phone. "She doesn't suspect anything?" Mark asked. My mother's voice crackled through the speaker. "Elaine's too sentimental. She'll cry for a week, then accept the check. She always does what she's told." Mark chuckled. "Once we're set up, we can figure out the rest. You and me, finally free." They talked for another 5 minutes about retirement plans, about the cabin by the lake, about splitting the proceeds from my father's house. When Mark hung up, I stopped recording. I stood there for a long moment, the phone hot in my hand, understanding finally settling over me like ice water. My husband and my mother had planned this together. I needed answers about my mother. I visited Mr. Keaton, our old neighbor who still lived 3 houses down from Maple Drive. He was 80 now, his hands shaky as he poured tea. "Your father was a good man," he said. "Honest." I nodded. "Mr. Keaton, did you know my parents well?" His eyes clouded. "I knew them, better than I wanted to toward the end." He set down his cup carefully. "Your mother, Patricia, she wasn't always forthright. After your father's first stroke, there were some papers he couldn't sign, medical decisions mostly, but Patricia signed them anyway." My blood went cold. "She forged his signature." "I can't prove it," he said quietly, "but I saw her practicing his handwriting at their kitchen table once. When I asked about it, she said she was organizing his papers, but the way she looked at me," he shook his head. "I should have said something." I left his house understanding my mother's pattern, and suddenly I knew how to expose it. The law firm handling the developer's contracts was downtown, a sleek building with too much glass. I applied for a filing position under my maiden name, Elaine Foster. My married name was Elaine Turner, so nothing connected me to Patricia Harper immediately. The office manager, a tired woman named Brenda, barely glanced at my resume. "You can start Monday. We're drowning in paperwork from the Maple Drive development." My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. "I'm very organized. I won't let you down." That weekend, I bought plain clothes and glasses I didn't need. When I showed up Monday morning, I looked nothing like the woman who'd confronted Patricia days earlier. I was just another file clerk, invisible and forgettable. By Tuesday afternoon, I had access to every document in the Maple Drive case, and I began to understand just how much my mother had to lose. The developer's file was thick with contracts and projections. I read through everything during my lunch breaks, taking careful notes. The company, Horizon Builders, had secured financing from 3 different banks, but every loan agreement contained the same clause. The title had to be completely clean, with no ownership disputes or legal complications. If any issues arose, the banks could pull funding immediately. I found the developer's correspondence with my mother. She'd assured them repeatedly that the sale was straightforward, that all family members agreed, that there would be no complications. She'd lied. The codicil made the title questionable at best, and if the banks discovered it, Horizon Builders would collapse. The entire development, 6 planned houses on the subdivided property, would fail. I made copies of everything and tucked them into my purse. Then I returned to filing, just another invisible employee, while the firm buzzed with confident plans around me. 2 weeks later, Patricia invited me to dinner at an expensive restaurant downtown. I almost declined, but curiosity won. She was already seated when I arrived, looking pleased with herself. "Darling, I'm glad you came. I know things have been tense," we ordered. She made small talk about her condo, about her new furniture. Then, over dessert, she dropped her bomb. "Mark and I have been talking. He's been such a help during this difficult time. We've decided he'll move into my guest room temporarily while you 2 work things out." I set down my fork carefully. "Work things out? Your marriage, dear, he says you've been distant." She smiled sweetly. "Don't worry, it's all perfectly innocent." Under the table, I pulled out my phone and sent a single text to the developer's attorney, a photo of the codicil and a message. "You should see this before closing." Then I smiled back at my mother. "How thoughtful of you both." The next morning, chaos erupted. I was filing documents when the developer's attorney, Mr. Foster, no relation, stormed into the office. His face was red, his voice sharp. "Who knew about this ownership discrepancy?" Brenda stammered something about complete title searches. Mr. Foster slammed a folder on her desk. There's a codicil, a veto clause. The daughter never signed off on this sale. I kept my head down, filing papers with steady hands while the office exploded around me. Lawyers shouted. Phones rang. Someone mentioned halting construction. By noon, Patricia called me. 7 times, I let it go to voicemail. Finally, a text. "What did you do, Elaine?" I replied simply, "Nothing yet." But my hands were shaking as I typed it. The first domino had fallen. Now I just had to wait for the rest. Patricia showed up at my house that evening, furious. Mark let her in before I could stop him. She cornered me in the kitchen. "You sent that document to the developers." "I sent them the truth." "I'll contest the codicil in court," she hissed. "I'll prove your father wasn't of sound mind when he wrote it. I'll drag this out for years." I stayed calm. "You could, or you could return the money and void the sale quietly." She laughed. "I've already spent half of it and the rest is invested." "You have no leverage here, Elaine." I was about to respond when my phone rang. Unknown number, I answered. "Ms. Turner, this is Kyle Martinez from the County Herald. I'm writing a story about a questionable property sale on Maple Drive. I'd love to get your side." I met my mother's eyes. "I'd be happy to talk to you, Mr. Martinez." Patricia's face went white. "You wouldn't dare." The article ran 3 days later. It was small, just a column on page 5, but it was enough. "Family property sale under question," the headline read. It detailed the missing signature, the codicil, the rushed sale. It painted Patricia as opportunistic and me as the wronged daughter fighting for her father's legacy. Public opinion turned immediately. I got calls from old neighbors, from Dad's friends, from people I hadn't heard from in years. They'd all loved my father and were furious at what Patricia had done. The comments section online was brutal toward my mother. Horizon Builders' stock dipped slightly, nothing catastrophic, but enough to worry investors. And then Mark showed up at my door, panicked and sweating. "We need to talk." The article had named him as Patricia's co-conspirator, citing anonymous sources. His boss at the insurance company had called him in for a meeting. His reputation was crumbling. "Fix this," he demanded. I looked at my husband, really looked at him, and felt nothing but contempt. I led Mark into our living room and pulled out my phone. "I want you to listen to something." I played the recording from weeks ago, his conversation with Patricia, planning their future together, discussing how to handle me. His face drained of color. "Elaine, I can explain." "No need," I said calmly. "Here's what's going to happen. If you or my mother try to contest the codicil in court, I'll submit this recording. It proves conspiracy and fraud. You'll both face criminal charges." Mark sank onto the couch. "You're bluffing. Try me." He stared at me for a long moment, then broke. "There's something else you should know. Patricia has another account when she set up using your father's information. She's been moving money through it for years." My pulse quickened. "What kind of account?" "A credit union account. It's in both their names, but she opened it after he died. She's been using it to hide money from taxes." He gave me the account number, the bank location, everything. He was trying to save himself by sacrificing my mother. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The credit union was small, tucked between a dry cleaner and a deli. I brought my father's death certificate and my identification. The manager. A kind woman named Gloria pulled up the account hesitantly. "This account has been active for 5 years," she said slowly. "But according to your father's death certificate, he died 7 years ago. So someone's been using a dead man's account." Gloria's face tightened. "That would be fraud." She showed me the signature card. My father's name was there, but the handwriting was wrong, too loopy, too feminine, Patricia's handwriting. "I need copies of everything," I said. Gloria nodded grimly. "I'll need to report this to our fraud department." "Please do." I left with a folder of documents that would destroy my mother. The last deposit had been made just 2 weeks ago, $20,000 from the house sale, hidden from taxes and the developer. Patricia had been stealing from my father's identity for years. My boss at the law firm found me in the filing room the next morning. I thought I was caught, that he'd figured out who I really was. Instead, he closed the door gently. "Elaine Foster," he said quietly. "Or should I say Elaine Turner?" My heart stopped. "I'm sorry, he held up a hand. "Your father was James Foster, wasn't he?" I nodded slowly. "James and I went to school together. He was the best man I knew." His voice softened. "When I saw your maiden name on the application, I did some research. I know what Patricia did to you." I waited, ready to be fired. Instead, he pulled out a file. The sale contract can be legally reversed. The codicil makes it invalid. But more than that, if we can prove your mother misrepresented the title's status, she's liable for damages to Horizon Builders. He smiled slightly. I'd be happy to represent you, pro bono, for your father's memory. I could barely breathe. You do that. James deserved better than Patricia. So do you. I invited Patricia and Mark to meet at a neutral location, a conference room my new lawyer had arranged. They arrived separately, neither knowing the other would be there. The tension was immediate. I laid out every document methodically. The codicil they'd ignored, the forged signature at the credit union, the bank records showing hidden money, the recording of their conspiracy. Patricia's face was stone. Mark looked sick. My lawyer sat beside me, quiet and professional, adding legal weight to every accusation. When I finished, Patricia leaned back and laughed, that same brittle, harsh sound from before. You wouldn't dare expose your own mother, the scandal would touch you too. Try me, I said quietly. I've already given everything to the district attorney's office. They're reviewing it now. Mark stood suddenly. Patricia, you said this was clean. You said there wouldn't be any problems. She turned on him. Sit down, this is all manageable. But her voice shook slightly. I stood. You have 48 hours to void the sale and return every penny. Otherwise, I proceed with criminal charges. For 3 days, nothing happened. Patricia didn't call. Mark moved his things out of our house without a word. I felt strangely calm, like I was watching events unfold from a distance. Then my lawyer called. Patricia's attorney contacted me. She's willing to negotiate. No negotiation, I said. She returns everything or faces charges. Elaine, she can't return everything. She's spent most of it. I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. Then she'll face the consequences. That night, I appeared to give up. I called Patricia and told her we could work something out, that maybe I'd been too harsh. She sounded relieved, victorious even. Mark texted me asking if we could talk. I ignored him. Because while they thought I was backing down, my lawyer was filing an emergency injunction through the county court. The motion would freeze the sale, halt all construction, and force Horizon Builders to stop work immediately. I'd learned my calm revenge from the best sources. Never let them see you coming. The injunction hit like a bomb. Construction stopped overnight. Workers stood around the property, confused, while their supervisors made frantic phone calls. Horizon Builders investors pulled out within days, spooked by the legal complications and negative press. The company's lawyer sent Patricia a formal notice: return the full payment or face a lawsuit for damages. She called me, screaming, "You're destroying everything. The developer's suing me for $300,000. You should have thought of that before you stole my house. I'm your mother. You stopped being my mother when you chose money over family." She hung up on me. An hour later, she called Mark. I only knew because he called me right after, his voice panicked. Patricia's blaming me for everything. She says I convinced her to sell. Elaine, she's going to throw me under the bus. Probably, I agreed. What am I supposed to do? I hung up on him. 2 days later, Mark disappeared. The police found Mark's truck at the lake, parked at the boat launch. The driver's door was open. On the seat was his wedding ring and a crumpled note. You win! For a moment, I felt genuine fear. Had he done something drastic? The sheriff organized a search. They found him 6 hours later at a cheap motel 30 miles away, hiding in room 112. He hadn't hurt himself, he'd just panicked and run. But the drama brought more attention to the case. Reporters started calling again. Mark, desperate to save himself, made a deal with the district attorney. He turned over every document he had, every conversation he'd recorded with Patricia, every email discussing their plans. He threw my mother completely under the bus to avoid charges himself. Patricia's lawyer called mine. My client is willing to cooperate fully. Too late, I said when my lawyer told me. She had her chances. The court hearing was scheduled for the following month. The courthouse was packed. Reporters lined the back row. Neighbors I hadn't seen in years filled the gallery. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my lawyer beside me, while Patricia sat across the room with her public defender. She couldn't afford private counsel anymore. The judge, a stern woman named Honor Franklin, reviewed the documents carefully. She questioned Patricia about the forged signatures, the hidden account, the rushed sale. Patricia's answers were weak, evasive. She tried to paint herself as a confused widow who'd made mistakes, but the evidence was overwhelming. When my lawyer presented the letter from my father, the note from the envelope, notarized and sealed years ago, Patricia's face crumbled. Your Honor, my lawyer said quietly, James Foster explicitly stated his intent. This house was to remain in his daughter's care. Patricia Harper knew this and proceeded anyway. Judge Franklin looked at my mother with obvious disdain. Then my lawyer leaned close to me. "There's one more surprise you might want to see." He handed me another document, a sealed letter from the courthouse archives. The letter was addressed to me, filed with the county clerk the same day my father updated his will. Judge Franklin allowed my lawyer to read it aloud. "To my daughter Elaine," it began. "If you're hearing this, it means Patricia has tried something I feared she might. The house at 847 Maple Drive is yours, completely and forever. I built it for our family, for the memories we made there. Your mother never understood that some things matter more than money. The codicil I added to the deed isn't a suggestion, it's a requirement. No sale can happen without your consent. If Patricia tries to contest this, know that I was of completely sound mind when I wrote these words. The house is your inheritance and your sanctuary. Protect it. Love always, Dad." The courtroom was silent. Patricia sat frozen, tears running down her face. She'd forgotten about this letter, the legal detail that destroyed every argument she could make. My father, even in death, had protected me from her, and the letter was notarized, dated, legally unassailable. Judge Franklin's ruling was swift and decisive. The sale was nullified completely. Patricia had to repay every cent to Horizon Builders, money she didn't have. The developer filed a civil suit for damages. The district attorney's office subpoenaed Mark for testimony in a fraud investigation, and I received full, clear title to 847 Maple Drive. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed me. "Ms. Turner, what will you do with the property now?" I thought about my father, about his dreams for that house. "I'm going to restore it," I said, "and I'm going to turn it into something that helps people." Patricia tried to approach me on the courthouse steps. "Elaine, please." I walked past her without a word. She'd made her choices. Now she'd live with them. Mark tried calling that night. I blocked his number. Some bridges, once burned, should stay that way. The house was mine again, and this time I'd make sure it stayed that way. 6 months later, I stood in the driveway of 847 Maple Drive, watching workers hang a new sign. "The Foster Family Foundation, a place to belong," it read. I'd renovated the entire house, turning it into a free counseling center for local children and families. My father had always wanted to help people. This was his dream realized. The old mailbox was back, freshly painted. The rooms were warm and welcoming, filled with comfortable furniture and bright colors. In the front hall hung a photo of my father, smiling with a plaque beneath, "James Foster, Builder, Father, Protector." Patricia drove by that first day. I saw her car slow down, saw her staring at the sign. She looked older, diminished somehow. Broken. She'd lost her condo, her savings, her reputation. Mark had divorced me and moved to another state. They'd both paid prices I hadn't had to enforce. Their own choices had destroyed them. I walked to the front door with the right key, my father's key, and opened it. Inside, families were already arriving for our first session. This was revenge, maybe, but more than that, it was justice. It was love. It was my father's legacy, finally honored the way it should have been all along. I closed the door gently and smiled.